everyone, and welcome to the round five Bridgestone CSBK review podcast, the weekend recap, all of the chaos. I promise it's not going to rain during this podcast and then be sunny and then rain again and then be sunny and then rain. We're inside. It's going to be okay. We will get through this one without having to change tires and wonder about exactly what we're going to do with strategy and all the rest. What a wild, wild weekend this was at Canadian Tire Motorsport Park. Thank you to everybody who downloaded, listened, shared, has given us comments, concerns, questions on the podcast leading into the event. It was really fun to be around a lot of people there that were saying, yeah, I listened. And they're like asking me questions about things that Colin was talking about. And I go, yeah, the guy on the other side of the video here, if you're watching on YouTube, he's the one you should be asking about the things that he was talking about, because I don't have the answers. So I bring in Colin Fraser.
So the situation is perfect at CTMP, right? Because all of the riffraff are on the inside of the track in the pit and the paddock. We're across with the video crew on the tower on the other side. So you guys are all debating all these things, most of which we don't even know is going on until, of course, things start and we don't know what tires anyone's on because we're so far away. So yeah, it's a bit of a situation where there's the inmates, right? The competitors, the crew, our staff on the inside of the track, and then
Yeah.
on the periphery, there's the management structure and the television.
Here's a question for you that I actually got from people. As you know, the only place I watch races from is CTMP, the top of turn two, which you told me I need to find a new turn. And I agree, because I actually watched the track day that was on Monday in the morning from 3, 4, bottom of 4, went up into Moss. Like I ventured around. I did a full track walk on Sunday evening with my dog Sky. There is not a bad spot, it seems like, at that place. It just depends on what flavor of racing you want to be able to enjoy from different locations. But I had people say to me, why is it that we cannot basically clearly communicate in race at the beginning of the race who is on what tire when you're in a situation like we had with variable conditions? Because it's obvious if you look at the lap times and who's pushing hard and who's not, and who should be at the front and who's not, and who is at the front that usually isn't there, that people are on different setups, different tires, and all the rest. Is there a way, Colin, in your opinion, for us to more clearly communicate to the fans at the track as they are heading out, okay, we know X, Y, and Z are on rear slick or wet fulls or whatever that might be?
Well, I think there's two problems there. One, accumulating data and whose responsibility and who understands what they're looking at, but also the reality that the teams don't know.
Yeah.
So when we see them pulling bikes out and warming them up when their rider's already on the warm-up lap with the other bike, and in both classes, Pro Superbike and Pro Sport Bike, most of the front runners have two bikes. So the switching setups is less of an issue because the different setup with a different tire might be a whole different bike. There's a lot less of let's switch the tires on this bike, because to come in after a lap and change tires which is changing wheels, is much more risky. We were wondering if Tremblay was going to do that because they seem to be set up to do both, but I believe he only changed bikes, and his delay, like he was ready to go well before the actual grid went. And just to be clear, what happens when you come in and switch, then you have to start behind the field.
Right.
So they launch the field, and it's weird at CTMP because the track is lower and the wall's quite high. You can't see what's going on. And obviously, the guy in the pit lane can't go till he's allowed to go. But what's also interesting is the people on the track proper don't know what's going on in the pit lane. So they don't know, did that guy crash on the warm up lap? Is he ready to go? Like, what's going on? And we saw this a few years ago with Zoke, where most of the people thought he wasn't in the race because earlier in the day, one of the front runners had crashed on the warm up lap for Sport Bike and never went out. So you kind of, whatever the last weird thing was that happened is what you think is the thing that's happening now. And we joke with the staff that at Mosport, you have to be completely prepared, because it's the things you couldn't possibly imagine that are going to turn out to be today's problems, because stuff just unravels so quickly, particularly with the weather and the way the wind is there and how fast things dry. And everybody has an opinion, but the track puddles and it drains in places, and local knowledge, and that local knowledge is not you live there, local knowledge is you've ridden there a lot, is so very, very helpful. And unfortunately, or in an intriguing way, it's fun that some of the guys base their decision on what the guy beside them does. He's going with this tire. And, Ben Young said to me when Trevor made what Ben considered a fairly conservative decision, then Ben thought, okay, this is not a day to be aggressive. But obviously, it worked out for Trevor Daley, and some of the other guys were very aggressive in their decisions. And although In sport bike, the race was stopped short, so we don't know how those strategies would have worked. In superbike, we saw those strategies play out, and they weren't bad, but they weren't going to yield a win.
Right. And yeah, I mean, making the call on the sport bike race to say, no, we are past half distance here. This is the end of this. I mean, it was really dangerous. Like it came in really, really hard at that point. I don't think anybody has any concerns about the fact that, yeah, that seems like in interest of rider safety and all the rest. But man, to see those strategies play out would have been unbelievable as that race went down the stretch, right? Because there was legitimate huge alterations in lap times and tempo and aggression as the conditions started to come in. And maybe if they would have tapered in, we got a little bit of it here, a little bit of it there, it would have been fine. But when it came like full CTMP. Yeah,
It wasn't a drizzle; it was
no.
brutal. And the funny thing is, it was coming for a long time. We could see it. The sky got lower. It got crazy dark. You knew it was raining really close by. Where I was on the tower at CTMP, I'm above the tree line, so you can really see the change in the wind
Colin's our official
immediately.
lightning pole for CSBK. We like to put him up there, and then if Colin gets struck, then we say, okay, that's yeah, enough.
Anyhow, so it held off, which was good. It got us past halfway. And what happens too is like any place, and we've seen this if you live in the Greater Toronto area, we've had some flooding and whatnot, and we had the
Yeah,
most rain we've ever had in July. But what happens is the ground will take a certain amount of water, and when it gets past that point, it has to find a place to go. And when so much of the pavement, so much of the track is paved, the runoff and whatnot, the water gets to a point, and then it starts appearing everywhere. The bottom of two is probably the weirdest spot that
right,
is very problematic, but there are 4 or 5 spots you have to watch, and they start to back up and flood at different times, but they all happen within a couple of minutes of each other when it's raining hard. So it had stopped raining, but it hadn't really drained, and then that next storm came, and it was really substantial rain. And I think at that point a lot of us were preoccupied with Tremblay, who'd made a pit lane switch, and his strategy seemed to be coming his way just as the race stopped. But this is the gamble when it's declared an open race, so you can start with wet or dry tires. It's up to you. But we're predicting the weather. You can't predict the weather, and we have satellite apps, and there's a lot of different ways to watch the weather. But in the end, you look and see what's close.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. For anybody as well who was at the track, wandering through the infield like I was, you got the full experience because like I'm at the top of turn two on the inside of the track, and okay, race is over, and I say, okay, I take my little guy Noah, let's go back and head towards the podiums, and maybe we'll go grab a snack and everything until the other races get going. And as we were walking, essentially from where the tunnel takes you out towards the outfield corners that are 3, 4, 5. I walked past someone who was singing Billy Talent River Below because the actual river that was about 3 inches deep that was running down the hill away from the paddock towards the bottom of, I guess, the top of turn one, bottom of turn two, where the Chevy sign or the Chevy bridge is there. I was like, it gave everybody a sense of where that cooling was really going to be bad. Was just, yeah, if anywhere is low, it's going to look like this on the track, and that's just totally unacceptable for everyone. So before we move on from maybe talking about the weather conditions and all the rest. You mentioned Trevor Daley making a relatively conservative decision in that sport bike race, or sorry, in the super bike race. In the sport bike race, for Trevor to go ahead and get the victory ahead of Jody Christie, and obviously the relationship of those two bikes that they were on, I thought that was incredible theater that I wish more people would have been aware. And you did a great job of painting it when we were at GP Bikes back on Thursday of, hey, Jody is riding Ben Young's GSXR 750 from Daytona, and Trevor is the one who worked on that bike and all the rest. But I don't think people really truly appreciated the fact that the dude who was battling either for first or second was fighting against a bike that he built for a dude that was going hard at him, and Jody was riding the wheels off that thing all weekend.
Well, if you like the surf movies, I believe the term we would use is the rat's revenge, right? So it's a strange situation. Ben Young and Trevor Daley are good friends. Jody Christie, way back when, used to race, particularly in the middleweight class, against Trevor Daley. In fact, Daley's win at Shubenacadie came partly because of a crash by Jody Christie. The other front runner who crashed in that same race that opened up a door was Kenny Reedman, who was the person who was turning the wrenches for Jody, which led to, I felt some comedy about trying to figure out an ECU that apparently has sprung a leak. So it's a small group of people who all know each other and have spent a lot of time together. When Daley was not able to race at Mosport because of COVID, it was Kenny Reedman who filled in for him. So these guys are all buddies and support one another. But it is interesting that they all wind up at the same place at the same time, which leads us to Superbike,
Yeah.
where Ben Young is on the tail of his good friend, his Daytona teammate, and trying to guess what to do because Trevor doesn't have any skin in the game. He can't win the championship. He isn't competing in the whole series, whereas Ben is oh so close to winning the title. And if Ben, I believe the math is such, if Ben had made a move on Trevor, then he could have clinched at CTMP. And both of them discussed being side by side on the back straight, looking at each other. And if I understand correctly, Ben wanted Trevor to know, hey, it's me, right? Like let's not get too far out on
Yeah.
this, right? Let's both get home in one piece. And Kazis was third. I don't think he was going to win, but he wasn't miles back, right?
Yeah.
And we've seen stranger things happen. I in those sorts of conditions at that venue, I don't count on. At one point with the video crew, I'm talking about what's a possibility, and I'm watching at Zoke's pace, and not so much looking at my phone or reading the splits, but looking at what's going on in the track. And I think Zoke's going to get to McKay by the end. We should be ready to try and catch that. That'll be a good story. Zoke got McKay that lap,
Yeah.
right? Like the accordion effect is just so crazy when people have different setups and different strategies and different tire choices. And it takes a lot of confidence. And Jordan Zoke has the experience to keep pushing that tire as far as it'll go as the track dries. We talk about that like it's an easy thing to do. It's extremely difficult.
Yeah. 100%. So there was a great clip that I believe it was actually the Bridgestone CSBK Instagram account that they had of essentially Ben getting off the bike and having the discussion with Trevor, like real time, like hopping off the bike and having the discussion of, hey, yeah, you saw me. So you knew it was me. Okay. And then understanding that they were going to, and it wasn't one of those things where, all these people show up and they pay money for tickets and then riders go out and do like show laps. They were pushing, like they were shot for shot. If you look at the lap time splits through basically like the first 12 laps of that GP Bikes Pro Superbike feature class race, it was like Ben was matching him side by side. And then, yeah, I think they started to settle in and realize, yeah, there's bigger things at play here, especially for Ben for obvious reasons. Tommy was incredibly impressive to me, Colin. Like he's the next one that I want to ask you about here because for Tommy to at the start of that race, Tommy absolutely dominated on that Yamaha R1 the start of that race, and I was just in awe of his ability because we said coming in he hasn't been riding with the series throughout the year. He's been doing a variety of different things, but he hasn't been on these bikes racing against these guys for a long time here. For him to come home with a podium on Sunday, I thought that was stunning and super impressive.
He's had podiums before, but that is for sure the one. The circumstances were such. I think the Yamaha suits those conditions, the way it makes power, the way it delivers the power. But his absence for a year is an awfully long time. He's a guy with a lot of feel, and he has learned an awful lot. He's had some good races at CTMP, but I think that was the best race of his career. I don't know where it will lead. I'm hoping that Yamaha can find a way to continue with that program because obviously it's a program that can yield results. And last year he battled with Zoke at CTMP, but he got hurt in qualifying at Shannonville, and then we didn't see him for a very very long time. But yeah, he rode well and looked comfortable. And it's funny, the conditions arguably suit people who are struggling with injuries, although we've discussed when you're injured, maybe sometimes it helps your focus. So Daley's hand was obviously
Well,
bad.
we'll get to that, but yeah, go ahead.
And Thomas had that crash on Friday, and he's ridden hurt a fair bit, and he recovered from a scaphoid, which is a horrible injury.
Yeah.
Brad McRae right now is recovering from two. I mentioned Brad McRae because that's the 600 that Tommy was McRae's bike, which is a good bike. Although it had a lot of little problems, and of course Tommy fell down on Friday. So yeah, a lot going on there. But I think his TV Tommy had a terrific weekend and should be very, very proud of that. And hopefully Yamaha are feeling energized about that effort.
And because he was there with us and because he was racing in Superbike and decided to focus on that after he had a spill of his own, TV Tommy will officially be on TV, which we finally get to have TV Tommy on TV. So I'm very excited to call that race and to see him. The other one I wanted to throw at you here before we get to kind of looking at what Trevor did throughout this weekend, going ahead and doing, I think he posted on social media that he did the double double now because he did Grand Bend and then he grabbed a Tim Hortons coffee and wrote D on it because that's the new move.
Well,
But
it's funny because when they were telling that story about pulling even on the back straight, and I'm thinking it's like you and your buddy on the 401 and you pull up beside him, he's wondering why you're right beside him, and you're like Starbucks, like I
yeah,
need to use
yeah.
the bathroom, whatever. And it seemed to lack the drama, right? But nonetheless, it was nice they were that comfortable with each other.
I mean, they have an incredible relationship when they're on track. It's very obvious that they've been able to do that, and it's yeah, to see them go ahead and do that. And when Trevor was that banged up with his hand, that we'll get to in a second, it's amazing. But I do want to because I've felt guilty at points throughout this year of not giving people the love that they deserve. First of all, Dave McKay doing a great job. Like, despite the fact that Jordan got past him, to come home in fifth in those conditions after David had had a series of really difficult races and DNFs and all the rest, whether it be Shuby or Grand Bend, where he thought he was going to have a great experience because he was one of the relatively local guys that had been in SOAR and all the rest. To
And the
see,
regional Grand Band where they just rebuilt the bike, right? So they've
right,
been having a difficult run. We haven't heard a lot about it, and they don't complain. And they always deliver a bike that looks brand new, right? The bike always looks terrific.
yeah.
So they are suffering in silence, I guess you could argue, but that bike is fast.
Yes, and he's got, I think, a super bright future on that bike moving forward. And this is one of those building, learning, growing, understanding kind of years. To be doing that and coming home in fifth in Superbike, I think is amazing. But on top of that, Sam Garan on Sunday being able to go ahead and lay down a 127.5 after going full Superman. I mean, Sim is special. I don't know how else to put, and I don't mean special is in like the condescending way of well he's just different. He's special. I mean Sam's actually special. Like his talent and his ability, whether it's just absolutely muscling around one of those baggers at CTMP, or if it's him recovering and bringing that thing home with the fastest lap of the race, or like Sam had an amazing day, and obviously first career Superbike pole and then gets on the podium on Saturday. We talked about that on the Saturday recap, but being able to see him do what he did on Sunday and the way that he just attacks and attacks and attacks and has this great energy and about him no matter what he's trying to accomplish. I wanted to make sure I got a shout out to him in, but the number one thing that I want to point out here is when you're mentioning Jordan Zoke, I was sitting surrounded by a bunch of fans, and I've got the lap monitor out, and I'm going, oh yeah, same as you. You see it from the tower. You go, Jordan's starting to heat up here. It looks like he might catch David. There was, I think, a 3-pack of back markers as well that he basically burst around in the same single lap, maybe the next lap, if I'm not mistaken. But Jordan's times as the race went on, he was in 10th off the start were 141, 140, 38, 36, 35, 33, 33, 33, 31, 31. And then all of a sudden it was 28-7, 28-7. And then he got David, and then it was back into the 29s and the 30s. But like the racecraft of Jordan Zoke, we can't go through this podcast without identifying the fact that, as you mentioned, yes, he has the ability to maximize everything in his package. He understands that place so well. But watching that in real time and going, oh, I think he might catch. Oh, he caught them. Like his ability to just crank that Kawasaki up and get the most out of it, get to the spot that he knew, and then settle in that fourth spot. Incredibly impressive to me.
Yeah, I think you can't take it away from Zoke. That was as well judged as it can be, and shows that if you have that ability, that strategy works. And as far as I know, give or take, maybe a little too much aggression on the first lap, almost everybody did it. Now, maybe not noticeable, but McKay was one of the guys who started with a slick rear, as did Zoke, as did Garant. McKay was the guy who did the best right off the bat, who was able to ride near the front already with the slick. The other guys were coming through. Now, Garant's example is a weird one because he fell right away, got right back up, got going full tilt, which is very hard to do for a number of reasons. First, to reset, your pattern of how you're doing things. Also, is the bike straight? All the issues that could have occurred when you fall down. Now, when the track's wet and the bike slides, normally it doesn't do a lot of harm, but he went for a fly. And then we have to jump back to Dumas. Now, Dumas, I don't have an answer to the question. I think he was on slicks front and back, and he fell in turn 8 on the first lap. And there are a lot of puddles in turn 8. So it may be that Dumas never had a chance with the strategy he chose. And Dumas fell, I think, right about the same time Garant was falling, I think, just in front of him. And to start on slicks both ends, that was pretty, if that's what he did, that's pretty bold. I don't have an answer yet. I've reached out to a couple of people to
Yep.
try and figure that out. But on the other hand, the guy who won on Saturday, sticking his neck out with a bold strategy, good for him. And I think a lot of this comes to that race from Zoke a few years ago. It comes to Sam at Shubenacadie with that brilliant ride on Saturday. And a million years ago, before we were spec tires in the mid 90s, probably 96, something like that at Shubenacadie, the king of Shuby and the king of the rain was a Halifax guy named Don Monroe who rode for Kawasaki, and he was miles ahead on a drying track. And the second place guy was a Kitchener guy with a bike built by Scott Miller from Fast Company, named Mark Kowalski. And it was the same thing. We're watching, maybe by the end, Kowalski might get it. You know, we're planning the TV for the last couple laps. Kowalski passed with like 6 laps to go because as the conditions changed, his tire came in and suddenly the ground just tilts, right? The table is way off kilter. And if you made that right decision, and of course, I can't help it coming back to sport bike where we never got to see
Yeah.
how good the decision could be, what Tremblay did. You know, Zoke's comeback was great. And of course, you know, with the battle Zoke between McKay, I believe that's a battle between people who both chose slicks for the rear. So McKay did a really great job for a really long time.
Yeah, it was great theater, and like you say in Sport Bike, it would have been incredible theater to see. We'll get to Alex at the end here, but I do want to ask you. Trevor Daley has posted things of how swollen his hand was. He's posted the actual X-ray. People want to check that out on the One Speed Inc. Instagram page and all the rest. Colin is shaking his head. He has no interest in seeing the X-ray.
No, I've
How?
seen it. I don't want to
Well,
look anymore.
yeah, I was good, but honest question, because again, anybody who knows me knows you know my background, all the rest. I come at a lot of things from football. There's no chance anybody, I don't care if you're a receiver, an offensive lineman with a club over your hand, if it's the Super Bowl, the Grey Cup, like nobody plays football with that, where your hand is that ballooned and that broken, and there's no way to rod it and surgery and pin it and go out there and have like a metal hand that's bionic that you can just survive with. How did he do that? How do you do that with a left hand that feels like that in those conditions and you're being pushed by Ben? Because let's be real, if Trevor would have backed off at all, Ben would have gone, thank you very much. I'd like to win the championship here at CTMP and celebrate for the remainder of the day. Trevor just refused to basically open that window. And that's when I think Ben had to go side by side and go, hey, yeah, I get it. Okay, let's go. Like, we're going to do this thing and we'll bring it home. But if Trevor would have backed off at all, Ben would have absolutely jumped into the fray. And he didn't do that, even though he has this massive break in his left hand.
Well, a different situation where maybe points were on the line, maybe you pour on the pressure, right? But I think I didn't have this conversation with Ben. I think he got close, he put some pressure on, he saw how hard Trevor was riding and said, you know what, this is not worth the risk it's going to take. And you know, arguably on the Saturday when Garand won at Shuby, Ben looked at that plan, that strategy, the Zoke strategy, let's call it, and said, yeah, this is not a fit for me right now, right? And he knew he had to go to Suzuka for the 8 hour and all that stuff. So it's a complicated scenario, and Ben's the guy, you know, with by far the most skin in the game. Trevor has ridden hurt a lot, and we talk about most people who've raced for any length of time have ridden hurt and frequently have done well in that situation. And you can summarize it that way, but that really doesn't describe Trevor. And I think Trevor's reluctant to have surgery, so I think his hands are in rough shape anyway. We've seen him with pretty severely swollen hands before, and he's lived with it. I wonder where he finds a glove because when you have even like I had a dislocated finger and just getting my glove on and off to race was miserable. So I can't imagine what it's like with what he's doing. Probably once you get the glove on, it feels okay. But those gloves are really nice and expensive. You're not going to be cutting them off every time. We're not in Europe where there's a guy standing waiting to hand you your next pair of brand new gloves. So there's a lot to do. And of course, Trevor looks after his own bike. There's a lot of preparation, even preparing your gear when you're going to ride in the rain, and what you do with the anti-misting and your visors and all that. There's an awful lot of things to keep track of. And some riders struggle with the amount of things you have to consider, let alone when you start getting into tire choices and chassis setup and wheelbase and gearing and electronics. And I would assume that Trevor still has his hands or his hand very much involved in all of that. So he's preoccupied. He's a busy guy, which probably helps. But still, it is remarkable that he was able to ride at that pace. And as near as I could tell, it wasn't too crazy dramatic. He had some moments, but everybody's going to have those moments on a track that's in that shape.
We had some monster moments when it was wet in Grand Bend when Trevor was there, including Trevor and Sam coming off a corner. I believe it was it 3 or 4 that they went through in Grand Bend where we were seeing it on the TV copy and almost simultaneously both had a huge wobble, right, and got back on things. I didn't see any of that from Trevor in the race on Sunday. I'll be very interested to see when we actually voice these races, which we'll be doing this week with our good friend Cam McFadden to see exactly what that looks like. But last thing I want to ask you here, Colin, is overall winner of the weekend. You can pick one from sport, one from super, whatever you'd like if you want to chop those two up because the conversation of Alex Dumas being on the Ducati and getting the victory for the first time since '95, but crashing out with the strategy in the picks and all the rest on Sunday, putting that up against Trevor being able to do another double, I think that's what it comes down to for a lot of people if you want to combine the two. But if we're strictly looking at just sport bike or just super bike, do you have a winner of the weekend?
Yeah, it's absolutely Daley because I think if you weren't at Grand Bend, it's easy to say that that was a circumstantial achievement, his Daley double. And this, with arguably more adversity, was, I think, even more impressive. And also the fact that at one point he was battling with a motorcycle that he helped build. You know,
Yeah.
it was pretty cool that he and Jody Christie were racing each other for a while. And you know, it'd be love to go with a sentimental favorite and pick somebody like Christie, or maybe even Kazaz. But I really think that Daley having another weekend like that when he's basically not racing full time this year, when he's busy with a lot of other activities with his business. You know, I think, you know, Trevor has rattled around, done his best, different bikes, different teams, different setups, trying to find a way. And to see him get that success after that amount of time and that amount of work and recovering from injuries and whatnot, it's a terrific story. And you know, if it's like, okay, you were a one trick pony, a one race wonder, whatever expression you want to use to describe what you can't say wasn't anything but a brilliant performance at Grand Bend. This is at least that, and with more adversity.
Yeah, absolutely. You can go a lot of different directions and try to make the case, but I think it has to be Daly as well, based on the accomplishments, the adversity, the everything else he went through. I will say, in terms of looking around at what could be moving forward, we need Jody Christie on the grid, man. Like somebody's got to get that dude set up and ready to go because he is so fast and so smooth. Tommy being able to get that podium again on Sunday, I think is tremendous as well. And those are fantastic stories. Ben being oh so close to winning the championship. You know, I don't know if there's any regret there for not doing it in round number 5. If round number 6, it seems like the lead has gotten to the point where whether it is on Saturday or Sunday, it will likely be closed out if he handles his business the way that I think he plans on handling
Well,
his
let's
business.
just take a second and mention that, you know, last year we went to Shannonville thinking that things were pretty clear. And now there was a makeup race, so there were more races, so that
Yep.
makes it more complicated. But it looked like Dumas had it, and it didn't play that way. And it happened on Friday. And Kazas was already out from qualifying in the morning. There was a lot going on. So, you know, Geraint is a mathematical possibility. It is a long shot, but a
Yes.
long shot is still a possible shot. And Geraint has improved this season. He is doing better. He has those 2 wins. He was impressive in both races in different ways at CTMP. So I wouldn't take it away from Geraint. And I don't think Ben is taking it away from Geraint either. I think he feels like he needs to build it by piece and not take a big swing and have a big risk.
Yeah. And that will be the intrigue as we head to Shannonville on Labor Day weekend is every single session we are going to tear apart the minutia of it and try to understand who's leading where and how comfortable they're feeling and all of the things that will come with the final weekend of the Bridgestone CSBK season. But I think if we look back at round number 5, we have great appreciation for the fact that whether it was Marshall's, our crew, the fans that were out there, the riders, the teams, the travel, the time, the investment, all of that, it was a great show, right? Like that was always my takeaway from going to this place and being able to see everybody come together is it's a pretty special place. I actually wanted to ask you this. I was walking my dog around the track on Sunday evening. I thought I have to ask Colin this. What is your favorite turn if I give you these two in terms of the massive left-hand descending turns? Is it 2 or is it 4? Because
A long time
I didn't realize how much 4 was just a drop off a cliff to the left as well until I'm walking it down and looking up from the bottom going, what in the hell is this? Like even up through 5A, I'm like, you're climbing what? It looks like 6, 7 stories in 2 seconds. You're not even on the brakes. You're just basically getting off the throttle. I'm like, this place is crazy.
Well, for the longest time, it was turn two, and famously, Jackie Stewart called it one of the toughest turns in any racetrack in the world. I had a really, really bad crash there and came very close to ending my own life and spent some time in the hospital. So my enthusiasm was diminished for attacking turn two. It's a blind turn.
Yep.
So I would say I have drifted over to four. Four, you can see your way in slightly better, not great. But the thing I love about four is the compression starting back up the hill up to Moss to 5A. And that is such an amazing feeling, particularly on a fast motorcycle where you're top of fourth gear and then you're braking. And of course, you're going uphill. So the braking is working your way and it's giving you confidence and it's telling you what the front tire wants. So that little transition, if you're really pushing hard, and of course, the king was Brett McCormick on Q tires. Everybody who ever saw that remembers can close their eyes and see him on a Q tire in the compression in turn four on a BMW Superbike, full beans. But yeah, four would be the place I'd go to now. But for the longest time, it was turn two.
Yes, that's very, very fair. And I'll mention this, like if I'm gonna probably do this on the voiceover session for the broadcast. If we call the back straight at Shubenacadie straight in bunny ear quotations here, it's the roller coaster, right? Everybody talks about it as that. Can we start calling the Andretti straightaway the elevator? Because you have no choice but to get off at the top of the floors, but there are serious steps to that thing, right? Like being able to climb up through, and obviously we're excited to see some of the onboard footage, whether it comes from sport bike, super bike, otherwise anybody who is up near the front, anybody who is in the back half of the field, because there's just wild things that happen in the tree line back there.
Well, it's busy. It's not as busy as the back straight at Shubenacadie, but it is not a straight. Unlike Shubenacadie, you probably have a little bit of time to get organized where your knees, your elbows, your chin, get in out of the air, and maybe have a look at some of your data, maybe. But it is not a restful place. Now we go to Shannonville next, and the back straight there starts from a hairpin. It's pretty long, and you do have time to relax and have a quick look around. And the place is flat, so you can see some things. At Moseport, you're definitely between the trees. At Shubenacadie, you're on the edge of a cliff, so not a lot of opportunity to gather data there. But that's part of why that track, both those tracks are so exciting. And, it's an unusual thing that Canadian tracks still have that kind of thing because most world tracks don't have anything like that anymore.
Yeah, so true. A fantastic weekend. Thank you to everybody who followed along. My last highlight of the weekend, Ben Young saying that he looked over his shoulder in 5B and saw Tommy coming down through turn four. I'm like, who has time in 5B to look over your shoulder and look 8 seconds back? What is that? We will have great.
The guy who's leading the championship.
We'll have great broadcasts for you coming up on TSN. Thanks for listening, everybody. At CSBK_official is where you can find us. We'll talk to you soon.